my heart.
The nation's economy expanded 1.4% last year on the back of chip exports. This was in line with the central bank's forecast, but still the lowest recorded since the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. With GTX express train lines that connect the capital Seoul and its surrounding areas set to open soon, the government has vowed to extend the lines for the convenience of commuters and make high-speed trains more accessible in other regions too. This comes as President Yoon held another policy debate session today with citizens. North Korea says its previous day's missile test was of a new type of cruise missile, which it called the Hwasar 3-31. The South Korean military sees this as an upgraded version of existing cruise missiles. It's January 25th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with the latest growth figures. The local economy expanded 1.4% in 2023 on the back of a recovery in chip exports in the final quarter. But this was the lowest recorded after the COVID pandemic outbreak. Our Lee Soo-jin has the details and an outlook.
South Korea's economy grew at its forecasted pace in 2023. Data from the Bank of Korea released on Thursday shows that the country's gross domestic product, a key indicator of economic growth, grew 1.4% last year, in line with the central bank's forecast. But the growth is nearly half that of the 2.6% on-year growth recorded in 2022 and the lowest seen in 3 years. The central bank mostly attributed the sluggish growth to weak private consumption as well as small increases in government spending, exports, and imports compared to previous years. Private consumption rose by only 1.8% on year, government spending by 1.3%, exports by 2.8%, and imports by 3%. In the fourth quarter last year, South Korea's economy grew by 0.6% on quarter, posting quarterly growth for the fourth consecutive quarter. Positive growth in quarter four was mostly led by an increase in exports thanks to a recovery in the chip sector. And the central bank expects the semiconductor-led recovery in the export sector seen towards the end of last year to continue this year as well.
We can see, just by looking at the data released by the Korea Customs Service for the first 20 days of January, that exports of semiconductors rose by a large margin, signaling that exports this year will also see recovery led by semiconductors.
But will this be enough for South Korea to achieve its goal of a 2.1% economic growth this year? One expert is optimistic about the country's growth.
I'm personally positive in gaining over 2% growth for this year. As we talked about, the domestic expenditures of consumption and investment are expected to be worse than last year. So the remaining momentum drives Korean economy would be a stronger export. The chip market is highly expected to be recovered from the first half of this year.
The Bank of Korea official added that for South Korea to post stronger economic growth this year, both the government and the economic sector need to focus on mitigating key domestic and international issues that impact GDP, such as persistently low birth rates and remaining competitive on the global stage amid the rise of India and China. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Overheated housing market, particularly in the capital, is forcing some people working in Seoul opt to live on the outskirts of the capital. To help those commuters, President Yoon today vowed to extend high-speed train lines that are set to open soon, among other pledges, as he had another debate session with citizens. Our Kim Do-yeon explains further.
from 70 minutes to just 20. That's how much time the Great Train Express, or GTX, will cut for those commuting from Dongtan in Gyeonggi-do Province to Suseo in Gangnam of Seoul, starting this March as the first GTX line, Line A, opens. That's according to President Yoon Suk-yeol on Thursday, as improving commuting times and transportation was the theme of the 6th New Year's policy discussion.
저는 그래서 선거 때부터 출퇴근 30분 시대를 약속드렸습니다. 출퇴근의 질이 바로 우리 삶의 질이기 때문입니다. 교통 격차 해소를 통해서 국민의 이 삶의 질을 확실하게 개선해 드리겠습니다. 당장 올해부터 본격적인 GTX 시대를 열겠습니다.
The GTX project officially started back in 2011. Many who work in Seoul opt for cheaper housing in Gyeonggi-do Province with a longer commute. The GTX was aimed to relieve this. Reducing commuting time also means that it could ease Seoul's intense real estate market as more people consider living further out from the capital. GTX lines confirmed so far are A, B, and C. A goes from Gyeonggi-do, north of Seoul, cutting through before ending at the southern part of the province at Pyeongtaek Station. B cuts across horizontally and is set to start operating in 2030. While C also runs vertically, set to operate 2028. All have a maximum speed of 180 kilometers per hour, 3 times faster than the current Seoul metro system. More are being planned as well. Lines D, E, and F will be pushed by the current administration. Line E is set to connect to the nation's main international airport. On top of this, the government is looking to create similar express train systems in the nation's 4 biggest cities, including Busan. Also, according to the government, more projects are in the pipeline. They include underground highway systems and improving the public transit of other local districts. Altogether, it will be worth more than $100 billion, including private funding. Meanwhile, Thursday's discussion was held in the city of Uijeongbu of Gyeonggi-do Province, where the groundbreaking ceremony for Line C followed. President Yoon was there to amplify his message.
처음부터 끝까지 꼼꼼하게 직접 챙기겠습니다. 늦지 않고 제때 제대로 개통되게 하겠습니다. 국민과의 약속은 반드시 지킬 것입니다.
President Yoon also spoke to those involved in the construction of the projects, asking them for a speedy but safe completion. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Beginning this Saturday, the law punishing the owners of large-sized businesses for accidents at their workplace will begin to affect small business owners. This is because the rival parties at the National Assembly did not reach an agreement until the last minute on an extension of the grace period given to small businesses. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
Beginning this Saturday, some 830,000 small business owners or CEOs will face penalties if they don't do their best to prevent serious industrial accidents at their workplaces. This as talks after talks between lawmakers spanning days at the National Assembly did not lead to a grace period punishment act. This would penalize businesses with 5 to 49 workers. The act was first enacted in 2021 to protect workers and customers from health risks and concerns due to preventable malpractices. It was implemented a year after in 2022, but only applied to businesses with 50 or more employees, with smaller businesses given a 2-year grace period. It punishes death, repetitive injuries, or sickness among workers as well as customers who have used their products or services. The owners may receive either a prison sentence of a year or more, or a fine of up to 1 billion Korean won, or around $749,000. Owners are required to conduct yearly self-inspections to check for safety hazards. Businesses in certain industries must hire an additional safety manager. While Thursday's plenary session was the last chance for an extension according to legal deadline, it wasn't discussed nor voted upon due to clashes in opinions between parties. The PPP has been calling for an additional 2-year grace period for small businesses, saying that it requires more time to prepare the safety measures that have been called for.
Many small and medium-sized business owners may face closures in the worst-case scenario unless the act is suspended. Workers will also lose their jobs.
The DP is calling for further measures by the government before it can agree with the extension. It's calling for the establishment of an industrial safety prevention agency as well as a related budget increase.
If the act is suspended for another 2 years without any action taken, our industrial safety will be in the same state again even 2 years later.
Amid the debates, President Yoon called for the Assembly's approval on an extension earlier on Thursday, stating the need to consider the situations of small business owners, his second comment of assertion since a cabinet meeting last week. 이시후, Arirang News.
President Yoon has appointed Park Sang-wook, a professor of science policy at Seoul National University, as the first senior secretary for science and technology at the presidential office. Following his appointment on Thursday, Park vowed to strengthen the country's strategic tech sectors, including AI and quantum biology, through proactive coordination with scientists and technologists in the fields. In November last year, the presidential office announced a plan to create the Office for Science and Technology, aiming to more effectively nurture these sectors at the governmental level. This new office will concentrate on developing 4 key areas: R&D policy, digital technology, biomedical sciences, and future strategic technologies. In other news, North Korea today confirmed its missile testing on Wednesday, claiming that the launch involved a new strategic type of cruise missile. Kim Jong-sil has details.
North Korea says the cruise missile that it fired on Wednesday morning was its new strategic cruise missile called the Bulhwasal 3-31. Bulhwasal means fire arrow in Korean. The North claimed the test was part of an ongoing renewal of its weapon systems and is a regular and obligatory activity of its missile and defense science agencies. Previously, its very similar cruise missiles were just called Hwasal 1 and 2, meaning arrow.
By giving it a complicated name, North Korea appears to be highly intent on threat propaganda, as if it's developing a new weapon system.
North Korea's underwater drone carrying a strategic nuclear weapon is called the Hail-2 unmanned underwater nuclear attack boat. The South Korean military provided analysis during a briefing on Thursday morning.
The cruise missile launched by North Korea yesterday had somewhat shorter flight distance compared to those launched in the past. We believe this time the test was intended to improve the performance of existing cruise missiles.
Experts say cruise missiles can hit targets precisely from long range, but because they are slow, they can be shut down if detected. It's for this reason that the UN Security Council hasn't banned cruise missiles as opposed to ballistic missiles for North Korea. But experts said Pyongyang's cruise missiles can pose just as much of a threat if they can carry nuclear warheads as claimed by the North. Tensions are rising on the Korean peninsula, with the regime carrying out its second missile provocation in 10 days after it launched a solid-fueled IRBM on January 14th. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
The conflict in the Middle East is creating a ripple effect across the global economy as it's disrupting one of the world's most significant shipping routes. Rising shipping prices and supply chain risks are the topics for our weekly segment today. Our trade correspondent Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio. Hi, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Jung-min.
Evening. So, Hae-ryun, can you tell us why there's been an issue with shipping around the world?
Absolutely. So over the past couple of weeks, hundreds of ships have been taking a detour in order to avoid attacks from Houthi forces in the Red Sea. The militant group has attacked several vessels with drones and rockets in what it says is an attempted block of Israel's shipping links to disrupt its military campaign against Gaza. As you can see on the map here, the shipping route through the Suez Canal is the shortest pathway connecting Asia with Europe and the east coast of the United States. It's why this route handles roughly 12% of the world's annual global trade, but now ships are taking an alternative path around Africa.
If you look at the travel time, which is in some respect now double, triple the time to the Eastern Med, normally it's 10 days through the canal. Now it is 18 days longer.
Despite the longer journey, major ocean carriers such as Germany's Hapag-Lloyd and Denmark's A.P. Moller-Maersk have diverted their ships. And as a result, the International Monetary Fund found that maritime traffic passing through the Suez Canal so far in 2024 fell by more than a third compared to the same period last year.
What does this all mean for the economy and which countries are affected?
So naturally, the crisis has led to a spike in shipping rates, as well as rising insurance premiums for ships that are still choosing to travel through the Red Sea. Not only does this directly translate into higher costs of goods, but it's also causing shortages at stores as parts and products are taking longer to arrive. According to UK-based jewelry shipping consultants, the average worldwide cost of shipping a 40-foot container has more than doubled in the past month. Companies such as Tesla and Volvo have suspended operations at some of their European plants due to shortages of parts for Asia, while retailers such as Swedish furniture giant IKEA have warned of possible delays in stock. With these rising costs, financial services company JP Chase predicted that worldwide consumer prices could rise 0.7% in the first half of the year and contribute to worsening in inflation. So in short, it's affecting countries all around the world and not just China, which relies heavily on shipping for its exports.
In the end, container shipping companies' European routes and the US routes all go through Korea, China, Singapore, and Europe, so the impact is virtually the same.
And Hyun, is there any necessary steps taken to mitigate these problems?
Well, Jung-min, the problem is still ongoing, so firms and governments are keeping a close watch to respond to any changes that arise. It's difficult to tell when normal operations can resume, so there's been a variety of responses to tackle different aspects of the conflict. Here's what an expert said about the steps that firms need to take going forward.
Changes will vary greatly depending on how much faster shipping companies deploy their ships and respond by changing network strategies again for this increased journey time.
Governments are responding in various ways. The US has formed a naval coalition with the likes of Britain and France to counter threats directly in the Red Sea. South Korea, on the other hand, is focusing on rising shipping rates. During an emergency meeting to discuss exports this afternoon, the country's trade ministry unveiled its plans to implement support for firms in stages depending on how shipping rates rise. It will be offering vouchers for firms to cover costs for services such as consulting and advertising, and raise support for SMEs by increasing designated freight space and funding 3.6 billion Korean won, or just under $2.7 million for shared warehouses in Europe and the US.
All right, thanks for your report today, Hyun.
Thank you for having me.
South Korea's two leading automakers, Hyundai Motor and Kia, both saw all-time high earnings in 2023. According to data released by Hyundai on Thursday, the company recorded around $11 billion in operating profit last year, surpassing its previous high in 2022 by 54%. The auto giant attributed the rise to robust sales growth in North American and European countries, on top of a surge in global sales of eco-friendly and high-end vehicles. Its smaller sibling Kia announced the same day that it logged an operating profit of more than $8 billion, also hitting a fresh high on the back of eco-friendly cars. On the cultural front, the Seoul Philharmonic, one of the oldest orchestras in Korea, recently appointed its new music director, Jaap van Zweden. He's holding an inaugural concert with the orchestra from today, featuring pianist Yoon. And ahead of this, our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin listened to what the maestro has in plan for his 5-year term.
Less than a month into his role as the music director of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra, Jaap van Zweden says he's already feeling at home. His connection with Korea goes back decades.
My big violin teacher was a Korean man, Hyo-kang, who is still a very respected teacher at the Juilliard School. And I have very close contact still with him. But on stage, I've been working for many years with Korean artists.
Before coming to Korea, the Dutch conductor led the New York and Hong Kong Philharmonic orchestras. Under his baton, the Hong Kong Philharmonic became the first Asian orchestra to be named Gramophone's Orchestra of the Year. Celebrating his new chapter in Korea, Seoul Philharmonic is holding a concert featuring pianist Im Yoon-chan, the winner of the 2022 Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. It's been only a few days since they started rehearsing together, but they've already found a rhythm.
I can smell, I can feel, I can see also that the history of this man is hardworking, serious musician. And that is always very touching and moving.
The two-day concert will provide a glimpse into the maestro's vision for the Seoul Philharmonic. Performing Mahler's Symphony No. 1 aligns with his goal of performing and recording all of Mahler's symphonies within his 5-year term.
And I think it will make the orchestra, it will put the orchestra in an extra layer of color, emotions, strength in the future.
For him, a top-tier orchestra consistently delivers excellence, and his aim is clear: to shape the Seoul Philharmonic into just that.
I think that maybe the road to heaven is maybe more beautiful than heaven itself. So being on the road with the orchestra is the big joy for me. And I hope also for the players in the orchestra.
And he hopes the audience feels the same.
We truly enjoy every concert that we play on stage. And so the enjoyment and the intensity, that is what we want to give the public.
Starting with this week's concert, Van Zweden will be opening up a new era with the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. 송유진, Arirang News.
Over in Gangwon, where the Winter Youth Olympics are taking place, 1 gold and 2 silver medals were added today for Team Korea. In the men's snowboard slopestyle final, South Korean Lee Chae-woon won the gold with 96 points, marking the 3rd gold for Team Korea. Ho-seok and Im Lee-won claimed the silver medal in the mixed relay speed skating. They competed against athletes from China, Japan, and the Netherlands at Gangneung Oval. China won the gold by a difference of 0.04 seconds. On the same day, the Korean women's national youth ice hockey team secured another silver in the women's 3-on-3 tournament. The team lost against Hungary in the final with a set score of 3-0. Nevertheless, this is the first ever Olympic medal in South Korea's ice hockey history. So far, Team Korea has claimed 3 gold, 4 silver, and 4 bronze. Daytime temperatures were higher than yesterday's, but today still felt like a freezer. The cold wave that lasted for nearly a week is now coming to an end. This freezing cold snap will continue until tomorrow morning and then gradually recover from the daytime.
However, there is still snow forecast in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island from tonight. Around 1 to 3 centimeters will accumulate by tomorrow morning. It's icy all over the place on the west coast and Jeju Island, where a lot of snow has already fallen. Special attention is necessary. Most regions will start the morning at sub-zero temperatures. Seoul and Daejeon -6 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 3 degrees in Seoul, Daegu and Gyeongju 7 degrees Celsius. As for Gangwon province, where the Youth Olympic Games are being held, morning temperatures will still be freezing as low as -13 degrees in Pyeongchang and Cheongsan. Please take care not to catch a cold. This coming weekend will be mostly sunny with winter weather back to normal levels. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
Welcome. 시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
So, you want a special experience? What? Travel? Meet K-pop stars? Wow! Okay, tell me, who do you like? Of course I know them. Here's a tip. You can travel and meet K-pop stars. What? You don't trust me? Who do you take me for? Okay, come close. Closer. Simply K-pop contour. No need to thank me. Oh, you're watching Simply K-pop Contour. You're watching Arirang.
Mount Everest, the roof of the world, standing 8,848 meters tall. Glaciers covering Everest are disappearing. A recently published report says glaciers covering the world's highest mountain are melting. It takes just 25 years for glaciers that have formed on Everest over the span of 2,000 years to lose around 55 meters of thickness. The reason for why ice on Mount Everest is melting is none other than global warming. The more glaciers melt, the more dangerous it is for humans. When soil and rocks become exposed due to melting ice, climbing Everest can be more life-threatening. Less water in streams originating from glaciers can result in water shortages. When there's not enough water to drink, grow crops, or generate power, local residents can end up becoming climate refugees. One more thing. Water from melting ice can cause flooding. In fact, flash floods in the Himalayas have occurred multiple times already. These natural disasters, dubbed glacier tsunamis, incur not only property damage, but human casualties as well. If we continue using fossil fuels and do not conserve energy, our planet would become warmer and warmer, and Everest glaciers could vanish forever. Protect the future of Everest. Save the environment. For the sake of Earth, for our sake. One more step for a better future. The Earth and Environment Report.
I definitely loved this movie, and I loved how the main character saw himself in this junior band, and he changed his mind from wanting to scam them in the beginning into wanting to help them and sympathizing with them.
Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. China's economy grew by 5.2% last year, hitting the government's official target. However, Beijing faces headwinds this year amid a protracted property crisis, with many experts expecting the country's growth next year to be at around 4%. Though the central bank maintained a market-based benchmark lending rate, it decided later on to cut bank reserves to defend the market and spur growth. How is China's economy doing, and what impact does it have on countries in the Asia-Pacific region? And how are other economies holding up? For more on this, we invite Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome to the show, Professor Song.
Yeah, good evening to you, and thank you for inviting me.
And we also have Professor Hwa-Kyun Kim from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Good to see you, and thank you for the invite.
All right, Professor Kim. So China's economy grew by 5.2% last year, like I said before, hitting a government target. However, many say this is lower than expected and forecast the economy to face serious headwinds in 2024. Why is this?
So when we look at economic growth, this can be broken down to consumption, investment, and the government expenditure plus net exports usually. And when we look at their data release, the merchandise sales part, I think, is okay. I think it's around 5.8% increase, so it actually is good. In terms of investment, you can, again, look at both private sector and the state-owned, the enterprises, the the investment side. The state-owned enterprise, so basically, the countries, the government-based firms, they increased their investment significantly, around like 6%, but the private sector actually lowered the investment by 0.4%. So clearly, given that, clearly this kind of things are more led by the government side. This is worrisome, and that's actually where most of the bad outlook comes from. Also, if you look at the exports and imports, which is the bread and butter of Chinese economy, export only grew by 0.6%, but the imports slightly decreased. So activity-wise, I think getting much slower than they expected, and also continued to slow. And of course, the real estate sector is a problem for China, so it's going to still have very weak demand this year, and also the structural constraint exists with the high debt and then stuff like that. So I think that's probably why.
All right, I see. Well, like our Professor Kim already pointed out, there are many reasons, but Professor Song, one of the main reasons why China is facing difficulties is because its real estate prices have plummeted, and a sustained downturn in this very sector is expected to be a drag on the country's broader recovery for this year. Why is China seeing such a crisis in the property market, and what risk does this pose?
Yeah, particularly the performance of the property market, particularly the real estate, has become some focus of attention in the slowing and the sputtering in Chinese economy. Yeah, that is true, but this is the outcome of the some Chinese government policy, and for which has been lasted for the past 20 years, which has been started under the Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao in the most 20 years ago. So this is particularly the infrastructure investment conducted and initiated by the government and under the auspices of the local government. That is that what turns out to be has turned out to be a successful. But since 2010, I believe that since the start of the declining population and which is a natural outcome of the one-child policy, which was started in just more than 40 years ago. So that played out suddenly it played out some crisis. According to Don Bush, he has mentioned that the crisis will come suddenly without any notice, but suddenly it is realized, and then we can see some kind of a cliff or some falling of the Chinese economy. So this is a very structural issue for the government, but as the Professor Kim has mentioned earlier, that he has explained the overall view of the Chinese economy problem currently they face, as particularly about the demand and some investment in the private sector. That is another source of the problem. So overall, apparently, the real estate problem, which has been pronounced very much, but we look into depths deeply, then the fundamental cause of this crisis is far dated back to the start in the early 20 years ago.
All right, so fundamental problem is China's policy that dates back to 2010, I guess. All right, Professor Kim, so despite this uneven nature of China's economic recovery, Beijing maintained their loan prime rates. Why so? And how did you see the most recent decision to cut bank reserves starting early next month?
Right, the things happened in a sequence. So initially they make the interest rate maintained both short-term and relatively long-term 5-year. And when they did so, I think probably their projection was they don't want to overly inflate the economy, given that the real estate crisis and debt crisis are already going on. It's kind of difficult to increase or decrease. So I think that's kind of their decision to stay put to see what happens. But then they realized that the economic forecast is pretty gloomy, and I think it's likely to actually make the economy sink further. So they decided to have a sudden decision to increase or inject the liquidity into the system. So I think the decision to cut back the reserve requirement ratio, that means they're going to inject the liquidity significantly. Actually, it was about 50 basis point or 0.5% decrease, which is a significant one. So it's almost like a semi-quantitative easing. I think it's clearly depending on how fast it can go, but I think it's supposedly from starting on February 5th.
Right.
So clearly they want to really massively inject the liquidity so that the economy starts flowing better. So I think it's partly based on their the negative outlook of the next year or this year's economy.
All right, I see your point. Now, Professor Song, the reason why we're focusing on slowdown in China's growth is actually because it does not end within China's boundaries. And according to Moody's, China's slower economic growth will significantly influence Asia-Pacific economies this year. What is your view on this?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that opinion. As to the prospect of the Chinese economy, particularly currently the Chinese economy has been helped as far as trade is concerned because of the Russia has only exit or only trading partner with China. So Chinese product replace most of the products or import and exports which was conducted under Russia has been replaced by the Chinese product. However, for the Asia Pacific areas, particularly unless the Chinese consumers' demand is not recovered, then the export to China could be a problem. So to that regard, I think the Korean economy, even though our economy, the top companies such as Hyundai, Kia, or Samsung may have increased their export and earnings and profits in light of the trade between North America or some other advanced countries. But in the European countries, for example, Germany had suffered so much from some sputtering economy in China, particularly even China, Germany has recorded a negative growth rate in GDP. So to that regard, the engine of the world economic growth has been should be led by the Chinese economy, unless the most of the countries, except United States and some countries, some smaller countries, most of the countries would suffer from some sputtering growth engine of Chinese economy.
All right. Most of the countries would suffer, and South Korea is not an exception. I see. Now, Professor Kim, let's move on to the U.S. economy. As investors become more upbeat about the high possibility of a soft landing for the country, U.S. stocks rallied recently. What other factors did investors see in stocks, and will this continue?
Well, clearly, in terms of like investor sentiment, both macro and micro aspects exist. And for macro the aspects, clearly the Fed policy is the main stuff to affect the discount rate of the stock price, probably. So we're expecting the interest rate to gradually go down, I think. So for this year, whether it's going to be first quarter or somewhere in between first and second quarter, it's not completely clear, but at least investors are seeing that this is relatively visible stuff to happen. So clearly that lowers the discount rate, therefore the prices are going up. And also the related GDP and the labor data seem to be much better than expected, or at least the expected to be good. Therefore, I think the cash flow outlook is also decent. In terms of the earnings, I think it's mainly led by some of the big companies, again, still like Apple, Google, and these companies. They're relatively doing well, and Microsoft and also other AI-based firms are doing extremely well. So overall, these big firms are propelling the growth of the corporate earnings, and that led to the high stock prices, I believe.
All right. Well, our Professor Kim told us why investors are so upbeat right now. But Professor Song, some say it is not yet the right time to be fully assured of a so-called Goldilocks environment to come, as there are still some factors that could cause recession. And what are the scenarios?
Particularly, United States economy has performed quite well, and they have enjoyed the very superior status in the economy right now. And but as Professor Kim has mentioned, even in the United States, the big companies such as Google, Microsoft, they have enjoyed so much high level of markup. So which means there could be some divergence between the U.S., even in the U.S. economy, relatively well-performing and big companies, and relatively a little bit working a little bit worse than among the small and medium enterprises. So that's why it is very important, even for the U.S. economy, to focus on some distribution of the earnings and incomes via the taxation. And for the Korea and some East Asian countries, particularly the South Korea has expected to perform 2.3% in GDP growth in 2024. However, in 2025, it is expected to be lower than. Most of the countries, even though they are slow, but they could expect some improvement in the GDP growth rate, then Korea is expected to go in reverse way, opposite way. Maybe that's because of the base effect prevails in this year's performance in 2024. That's why they have, with South Korean economy, GDP growth rate could be recorded as a very 2.5% or something higher, but it will be stabilized in 2.1%. But as long as this is the scenario for to work, as long as the world economy, such as some wars and the battles in Middle East and other countries could be settled down. So still there is a very quite a large uncertainty is ahead of us.
All right, I see. We are going to talk about South Korea's situation, but before that, Professor Kim, I'd like to ask you about Japan stocks. It hit a 34-year high, and some say that Tokyo is even reclaiming its lost decades. What drove Japan's booming stock market, and what's your forecast for the Japanese economy?
It's true that finally the Tokyo's the stock market actually just rallied, and even if it's actually the 34-year high, I mean, for the last 30 years, it's been really stagnant. So I think, I don't know, it's been virtually non-existent in terms of growth. But now I think clearly compared to other countries where inflation led to really high interest rate, Japan still maintained like negative target and negative interest rates, or very, very close to zero, even for the loans and the other corporate rates. So clearly that helped a lot, relatively speaking, compared to other countries. So with the really low interest rate environment and then massive in the liquidity, I think that helped. But despite that, actually, it took a long time. But then I think largely in part of the foreign investors started investing more actively in other countries' stocks for the last 5 years or something. And I think that's one of the reasons, because many of the foreign investors started investing in Japan's stock. I mean, most notably, like Warren Buffett, for instance. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. And still, I think the economy-wise, there are some risks ahead, because now they probably have to make decisions to increase their the Bank of Japan's prime rate and then target rates, and that can probably increase the cost of debt financing as well as the equity financing, and also it's been like deflationary mode, and finally the Japan starts having some inflated economy, although it's a good thing. The issue is the consumers and also the economic agents in Japan. They are so used to this somewhat low price level, and then when they start seeing this price increases, that actually can lead to some fear actually about like purchasing goods and stuff like that. So that's another possibility, and then possible the downward spiral back again, that some stagflation can occur and things like that. So it's not too worrisome, but I think there's a chance as they increase the target.
All right. Japanese stocks are doing well right now, but there are still remaining concerns over the economy. All right. Well, Professor Song, unlike in the U.S. and Japan, Korean stocks have not seen that much of a rise. Is this because of concerns over China's economy and other uncertainties that you have already mentioned?
Particularly for the South Korea and China, I would like to mention some demographic factors that could work against some growth of the economy. Youth employment in China is very serious, more than 20%. And the youth employment rate is also quite low for the South Korea. So that means that the job market and the prospective economy is not as bright as Japan or United States. Particularly in Japan, the youth employment rate or unemployment rate is quite low, because that means they could find their job very relatively easily. And also the supply of labor and with a meaningful some inflation rate, that works quite well for the Japanese economy. That's why they have seen some surge of the stock market. And even Professor Kim has mentioned some Bank of Japan's provide liquidity still further. And even though they have given up some yield curve control, so it's like they start tightening of the monetary policy, which was lenient in the past, but still they would like to keep the interest rate as low as possible, and they would like to inflate the price and give the incentive for the companies to produce, particularly for the domestic economy. So that is quite a contrast between the U.S. and Japan versus the South Korea and China. That what matters is a domestic economy.
All right, I see. Well, Professor Song, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this one last question. Staying on Korean economy, inflationary pressure was actually a great concern for us. And some experts say disruption to shipments using vital trade routes through the Red Sea right now could push up prices and hit economic growth. How concerning is this, in your opinion?
Yeah. Because of the Yemen Houthis rebellions that attacked some freight ships which goes to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, but that only increased the delivery time and the lagging, and the cost is particularly the freight-wise, the cost is a little bit increased, but it should be temporarily, and then the freight ships such as oil tank or other big ships, even though they take longer, but as long as it is delivered in time and not like such a supply disruption which occurred in the outbreak of the pandemic, that is quite different. So I don't think much of the negative impact on the world economy. What matters is now the Chinese economies, how they could come back to the growth of engine of the world economy. That depends upon some domestic consumption increase, which can be successfully conducted by the Chinese government or Chinese peoples, because they save too much. They save too much. And the social security net is very bad for the Chinese population. That's why they focus on investing in the real estate and also saving too much money. So they must spend and consume more.
All right, I see. So what matters is China's economy, I guess. All right, well, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Kim and Professor Song, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and my pleasure.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Gangwon 동계 청소년 올림픽 대회